If you didn't think that anything was wrong with American Airlines, in a couple minutes, I think you're going to have a slightly different perspective. See, American Airlines stock price has sneakily declined by over 80% since January of 2018. Yeah, it's before the recent global economic crisis that started in February of 2020 hit that American Airlines was declining and starting to deteriorate from the inside out. If American Airlines is the biggest airline by fleet size, revenue, scheduled passengers, and almost every other metric, and this is a company that has been an innovator since the 1930s when it founded, how is it possible that they're deteriorating and financially on the verge of an absolute crisis? Well, to find out the answer to that question and to know where the airline may head next, you've got to go back all the way to the beginning and see the rise and the fall of American Airlines and see what made them a unique airline that captivated the public's imagination, that was trusted with millions of flights by millions of passengers for generations, and why that may all fall apart in the next few years if something in American Airlines doesn't change. American Airlines has always been a company obsessed with getting bigger and getting better. And the first way they did this was back in the 1930s when a company called the Aviation Corporation started acquiring many small airlines that popped up across the United States after the Wright brothers' first successful flight. See, the Aviation Corporation put all of these small airlines under their umbrella and ended up with nearly 80 of them. By 1930, these companies merged to form American Airways, which changed its name to American Airlines by 1934. Businessman E.L. Cord took American Airlines, this new conglomerate with over 80 small airlines under its umbrella, and became the first profitable airline that could make do by flying passengers instead of mail, as was very, very common in the early days of air travel. American Airlines successfully did this by working with Donald Douglas, who would later go on to found the corporation that would become McDonnell Douglas, which would later be acquired by Boeing Airlines, the legendary airline manufacturer that today still dominates the market. But Donald Douglas, back in 1936, helped American Airlines develop the iconic DC-3, the first airline that could earn a profit by carrying passengers for the company, not just US mail. American Airlines quickly took off after that and continued to expand. Its signature flight was one from New York to Los Angeles. Now, for a little bit of perspective today, that flight is about 2,500 miles from New York to LA, and that averages just about 6 hours from takeoff to touchdown. But back in 1939, when that became American Airlines' signature flight for the people to cross country, that included 8 stops, 1 plane change, and took 20 hours and 19 minutes to complete. Just gives a little bit of perspective as to how good we have it here in 2020 compared to the original American Airlines passengers. But American Airlines passengers at that time were nothing short of thrilled to be hopping on this brand new company that delivered them safely and securely. And American Airlines wasn't done expanding either. Not only was the company big and very good at acquiring and merging with other firms to become bigger, but they were pioneers in the airline and aviation industry. American Airlines was the first to open what is called the Stewardess College in Dallas, Texas, which was the first official flight attendant training facility in the world. In 1973, American Airlines was the first to employ a female pilot. They also created computer reservation systems, frequent flyer loyalty program that still exists to this very day, and the first airline to introduce electronic ticketing. By 1978, American Airlines was flying high, but there was a little bit of political turmoil on the horizon. See, the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 was just signed into law, and what that did was it took the competitiveness that America is known for in its free markets and distributed that out to the airlines, which meant airlines had to compete on price, quality, and service, and American Airlines was wildly unprepared for this. Before, airlines had their own unique territories and own unique flight routes that protected them from the open market and free competition, but this opened airlines up to the concept that the best firm wins. So American now needed to raise cash, improve their service, and do this all almost instantly. The company had the grand idea of, instead of issuing more stock or taking on more debt to adapt to these changes from the Airline Deregulation Act, that they would introduce the Air Pass, a $250,000 lifetime ticket, which meant unlimited first-class travel for life. America would sell these to select customers, the richest of the rich, the top 1% who wanted to take advantage of first-class travel on American Airlines for the rest of their lives. Now, holding this ticket was a guarantee from American, they sold it as, that you could travel on our planes first class for the rest of your life as many times in a truly unlimited travel perk. All in all, under 35 customers, including Mark Cuban, the billionaire owner of the Dallas Mavericks, would take American Airlines up on this expensive ticket, but the ones who did were rewarded for the rest of their lives. See, this American Airlines Unlimited Pass became one of the most incredible deals in business history for the consumer. American thought it was a great chance to raise money, but two customers really took advantage of it like never before. Steve Rothstein was one of the few consumers to purchase this pass, and he considered it a bond. And instead of American paying him dividends in cash, he said, American's now paying me dividends in air travel. They needed cash, they could pay me miles. Steve ended up booking over 10,000 flights over a 25-year pass. That averages out to over 400 flights a year. Jacques Vroom was another man who took advantage of this, and Jacques flew over 2 million miles in 2 decades. He used his pass to catch all of his son's football games on the East Coast. He popped over to France and London just to have lunch with a friend. When his daughter had a middle school project on South American culture, Jacques went straight down to Argentina into the city of Buenos Aires to show her what the culture was really about. American Airlines, in a first string of a few things that would catch them up in the next few years in a negative light in the press, started to try to think of ways to revoke these passes and eventually stopped both of these men once they departed a flight and revoked their passes and told them they were unable to fly with the airline forever. Both men rightfully sued American Airlines, but American would go on to bury them under a landfall, an avalanche of lawyers and legal teams, just discouraging them from ever pursuing their case to redeem their ticket. Things were going fairly well for American, though, up until the 2000s when the attacks of 9/11 happened. See, 2 American Airlines flights, Flight 7 and Flights 11, were involved in those September 11th attacks. The airline industry went into complete chaos after that, and it would take nearly 3 years until July 2004 to finally get back to the levels that it was at heading into the fall of 2001. This was a major hit and sent shockwaves through the airline industry, and unfortunately for American, in 2002, they were going through a major negotiation with one of their labor unions, and CEO Donald Carty was leading these negotiations for the American side. And Carty wanted to do the best to work out the best labor deal that he possibly could for American Airlines and their shareholders. So he was, of course, working to limit the pay that the workers in the unions could get working under American. Unfortunately for Carty, the same time that he was doing this and just about to take a deal that the union agreed to sign to the bargaining table, it was found out that he was secretly this whole time was funneling pensions that were guaranteed for all of the executive staff and just about to sign off on egregious bonuses for the airline top executives. This was a huge scandal in American Airlines, and maybe it wouldn't have mattered except the company was in absolute turmoil after 9/11 and was bleeding over $10 million in cash a day. This is the first in a string of mistakes that American Airlines would make in management that started to lead a bit to the downfall that we see today. See, it took them a few years to recover from the 2001 disaster, and just as they were pulling out of that, the economic collapse of 2008 hits, and airline travel once again takes a hit, not because of safety this time, but because consumers across the world are reducing expenses and really not spending on frivolous things such as air travel. By 2013, American Airlines' parent company, AMR Corp, was experiencing such financial troubles that they had to file for bankruptcy and was ripe for a takeover. As a way to stabilize the company after AMR's bankruptcy filing, American Airlines needed to find a partner to merge with to continue in its existence.
Bankrupt American Airlines is about to become the world's largest airline. It has finally agreed to merge with U.S. Airways after months of negotiations. You also keep the same name.
See, American Airlines was one of the biggest airlines today, but their expenses were so high that they were unable to be profitable. Fortunately for American Airlines, they found a willing partner in US Airways, one of the other biggest firms of the day, to create a massive airline merger, one of the biggest in world history that we've seen. When this merger successfully went through, American Airlines retained their branding because of their iconic name and iconic colors, but US Airways took most of their executive staff and became the new leadership team at this merged company. As American flew into 2015, 16, and 17, the company started making absolutely massive investments to re-up and refresh all of their jets, whether refurbishing the airplanes or buying them completely new from Boeing and Airbus. American Airlines also invested in their services and quality of the staff, as well as the lounges and areas that customers would go to prior and post. These investments were one that was a little bit risky, but would certainly pay off for the company if revenues stayed strong and profits continued to churn back into their pockets. See, American at this time, after their merger with US Airways, was the biggest airline in the United States. They had the most routes, carried the most passengers, and the goal was just to expand that lead indefinitely from their other competitors such as Southwest and Delta, who were nipping at their heels. One expert in the finance industry looked at American and said, if this company continues to experience great profits and great revenue streams from a solid economy, there's nothing that they can't do. But if we experience an economic downturn, they have easily the scariest balance sheet in the airline industry. Well, unfortunately, turning into 2018 and going towards 2020 in the present day, that economic downturn that financial advisor warned about is exactly what happened to the company. See, nobody could predict the downturn in the economy, in the global economy in 2020, but when it did, it hit harder than anything that anybody could anticipate.
After the worst day since the crash of '87, second worst day ever, with the Dow plunging nearly 3,000 points to the lowest close in 2 years. S&P plummeting 11.98%, NASDAQ nosediving 12.32%. A truly sickening day with a horrendous last hour.
Nearly all air travel ground to an absolute halt, with only essential flights and regular routes that the airline companies could not ground remaining in service. And unfortunately for the airliners and American, who is bleeding through $70 million in cash per day, there's nothing they can do to hemorrhage these losses anymore. See, the problem with being the biggest airline with the most planes and the most network is that you have the most to lose, and that when things go poorly, you will burn through the most money the fastest because you're such a big operation. For a company that's saddled with debt from just recently in the last 5 years refreshing their whole fleet, to now not having passengers in the air, but all of the fixed costs of being an airline still in place, American is in a crippling place and barreling towards bankruptcy. The company just accepted a $5.8 billion bailout package in federal aid. $2.2 billion was lost for the firm in the first quarter of 2020. Even Warren Buffett, a big-time investor in the airline industry in the last 5 years, has sold all of his shares in American Airlines, saying he can no longer reliably predict the future of this industry. When an investor that big, the Oracle of Omaha, backs out and leaves his money on the table at a loss, then you know that the future is far from secure. American Airlines has a lot to do to regain profitability down the road, and the external environment is not their only problem. American has one of the most unreliable services, problem with inconsistent Wi-Fi, and timing in terms of taking customers to their destinations when they say they will was at best questionable in their reputation with consumers. At the end of the day, this may be a company that ended up flying too close to the sun, no pun intended, but for now, the only thing American Airlines can do is to wait, and wait for this global crisis to pass and for them to get back to flying, because when you're that big and that leveraged in debt, you really have no choice but to start making profit and make it soon. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into another Rise and Fall series. In this channel, we talk about the stock market, investing, we talk about companies all the time, financial apps. Please tune in and subscribe and like to the channel if you're into this type of content. Have a great day.